Bird, Professor of Social Sciences and Health Policy and Director of the Maya Angelou Center for Health Equity at Wake Forest School of Medicine. My journey with Alzheimer's disease began about 22 years ago, when I was on sabbatical at Duke University's Center for Human Genetics. I wanted to study Alzheimer's disease because I had observed its ravages in my hometown. Few people called it Alzheimer's disease, and even fewer knew how to get a diagnosis, how to manage it, or prepare for their future living with it. It was almost a mysterious disease where family members would isolate patients and call it a normal part of aging. As I think retrospectively, I realized that families also knew little about how to get adequate assessments for a diagnosis of Alzheimer's, and many families suffered because of this. My sabbatical coincided with the release of the Human Genome Project, and I began working with some of the most prominent Alzheimer's disease geneticists in the world. I was shocked, however, to see that their brain bank with over 8,000 samples only had 43 samples of Black people. I decided to focus on Alzheimer's disease disparities and equity and assure that historically marginalized people of color had the opportunity to increase their knowledge and empowerment around Alzheimer's disease, and eventually participate in research studies and clinical trials. Such involvement is often important in improving their own individual health, improving the generalizability of research, and equitable health outcomes. Of course, when we began this work, there was considerable doubt that we would ever get enough African Americans to participate in our genome-wide association study. I wanted to understand, however, genetically, why African Americans may be more prone to have Alzheimer's disease than whites. When I spoke to the center director about this project, she said, "There's no way we will get enough Black people in the city to do this work." She said, "I've been able to put a sign up in the elevator and get as many white people as needed, but getting Black people in the study would be terribly difficult." She appreciated the importance of the study and shared that it was an interest of hers as well. She also agreed that we would need thousands of people of color to participate in the study to ensure that the data and findings in Alzheimer's, as well as other chronic diseases, were appropriately generalizable. So we decided that it would be prudent to be involved in respectful community engagement as opposed to going directly to the African American community to ask for study participation. We felt that the African American community deserved a better approach and that it needed to understand what we were doing and what we were trying to accomplish and why. After my sabbatical, I went to North Carolina A&T State University as chair of the Department of Biology. North Carolina A&T is the largest historically Black university in the country. The institution would turn out to be the perfect place to create a robust, community-centric program to increase awareness about Alzheimer's disease in African Americans, to build trust and trustworthiness, and to eventually engage African Americans in studies that had potential to answer important questions about the prevalence of Alzheimer's disease in this population. So long before we began to recruit African Americans for our study, we conducted a feasibility study to understand the community's awareness about and experiences with Alzheimer's disease. We needed to understand and identify barriers to research participation, to understand their past experiences. So we asked what type of community engagement the community would like to see from us as investigators, what it would take to get them involved in research. We learned that an Alzheimer's disease diagnosis is not just an individual diagnosis. It truly is a family diagnosis because the family burden is so extraordinary. This, in turn, informed our approach. We wanted to create opportunities for families to learn about the disease, to learn about how to get a diagnosis, how to get support for families, and how to help them develop the skills to navigate the disease, including the physical, mental, emotional, and financial aspects. With our learnings in mind, we built the Center for Outreach in Alzheimer's, Aging, and Community Health, COACH. We did this in partnership with industry partners, North Carolina A&T support, of course, its alumni support. We thought it was important to have a physical space right in the heart of the African American community where we could target families who either had or thought they had Alzheimer's disease, and families at risk based on family history. So based upon what we learned from our feasibility study, we hosted annual and ongoing caregiver conferences, support groups, book clubs, healthcare days, memory Sundays, Alzheimer's walks, and many other opportunities for learning. We even had Ruben Studdard, an American Idol winner, write a song for us so we could have listening parties. Further, we leveraged the institution's newspaper, the radio, the band, the music and art departments, and very interested faculty members to create messages that went to everybody, every race, every ethnicity. With all of these, there were opportunities to learn much about and enroll participants eventually in research. Most importantly, we listened to the community with regard to what it needed to hear and engage. We were known for community engagement in Alzheimer's disease and in aging, particularly in the African American community. It was great that we built COACH at the largest Black institution, but we couldn't assume that Black patients were going to come to us and participate. It was important for us to realize to respectfully go into the community with the appropriate cultural humility and get its buy-in first. In addition, we return data and progress to the community through events and websites and social and print media. The primary contribution of COACH was its presence and authentic relationship with the African American community. It was a physical space where affected individuals, caregivers, family members could congregate to share and to learn with staff who could empathize with their experiences. It was staffed, of course, with individuals who knew the real experiences of affected families. Once trustworthiness was established, we were able to recruit over 1,000 African Americans, affected and unaffected individuals with Alzheimer's disease, with about a 95% retention rate. The most common thing we read about as we prepared was the lack of trust in medical institutions and of medical research by underrepresented and underserved communities. We have traditionally placed the burden of trust on the community. So a lack of trust stems from the way communities have been treated historically. If we go back from slavery through Reconstruction to Jim Crow, and even up through where we are today, people of color have been abused both medically and socially. So one of the most notorious experiments is, of course, the Tuskegee study of untreated syphilis in the Negro male, which lasted for 40 years and was supported by the United States Public Health Services and the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. Descendants of those men are still living today. People abused by the eugenics movement are still living. People who remain marginalized and racialized today are very aware of current abuses in medicine. There's also a difference in the way people are treated clinically, irrespective of their ability to pay. This was laid bare with the COVID-19 pandemic. So all of these issues, historical and current, make people suspicious about lending their bodies to research. However, we found that African Americans were very willing to participate in our studies, but when appropriate community trust is built. I believe strongly that building trustworthiness is an appropriate approach for all of us to take a look at ourselves, irrespective of our role, whether we are a provider, a nurse, pharmacist, or a researcher, and see where we might be exacerbating or mitigating the trust issue. An additional barrier is that researchers may not be engaging the community authentically. We must understand key needs of community, their hesitations and barriers, motivations, and previous experiences. Sometimes as providers and researchers, we may unintentionally create new barriers and ignore the relationship that is needed with the community to get it to say, yes, we will do this. As researchers, do we take the time to explain to potential participants what is going on with the project and let them know that they can quit at any time? Do we give back information to the community to inform about what we are learning or what we have learned, even if it is not what we expected? For people who have limited experience participating in research, there's a huge discrepancy between research and people's lived experiences. Many institutions now, however, are looking to hire community members on their research team to make and sustain the bridge between research and community. Partnering with African American faith leaders, we created a pastors network that established congregational health ambassadors in communities to disseminate health information. The organization itself gives the community tremendous visibility, and the trusted voices give us immediate credibility. Targeted participant communities are where we learn. So it is not just about participating in a study that we have conceptualized. It is about co-learning bidirectionally. Our communities are our greatest assets, and we should treat them like that. So it's critical for researchers to propose community involvement in every stage of the research process, even in the planning stage. Lastly, as researchers, we must challenge our assumptions about community. We cannot assume that participants will understand a 30-page consent form written by researchers. We cannot assume that they will have available study partners or even a way to get to and from the study site. It is important for us to treat the community as a trusted partner and build trustworthiness. As providers and researchers, we have an obligation to acknowledge history, why people may not trust providers and researchers, to respect communities, their time, and that they may have mistrust or may not want to be bothered by us. We must understand and engage our communities. This includes deeply understanding their cultures, as well as the barriers and motivations for research participation. We must remove structural barriers and increase education and literacy. We must help people fully understand consent forms, other forms, and offer newsletters and seminars. We must remain connected to the community, even after the study is over. We should create ways to give research back to the community, keep the community informed of research processes and results, and continue to invest in community engagement to meet people where they are. We can empower people with education and knowledge, and we can remove some of the structural barriers. We as providers and researchers will have to look at the experience and the burden of participation in ways that we have not before. Together, we can make a difference.